An accidental discovery.
Right where we're standing, I found a strange-looking stick.
That'll probably go down as one of the most significant archaeological finds in New Zealand history.
We found far more than we could possibly have imagined.
The discovery of a waka buried on the coastline of Rēkohu, the Chatham Islands, has changed life on the island for its 650 residents.
Yeah, the whole island's abuzz, and I guess the significance of this waka find is not really out there.
Where did it come from? What is it made of? And most importantly, who did it belong to? Kia ora, kia ranga, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, the two parties claiming ownership of one waka.
It's pretty clear in my mind, and in the mind of probably most right-thinking people who know their history, that this is a Moriori ancestral waka.
How do you determine who owns something that's likely hundreds of years old?
It is uncertain where it may have come from or who it belongs to, but given the stories of our people, our tipuna, there is knowledge of the waka that was there in that area.
And when it comes to excavating something of this magnitude, where do you start?
The problem with archaeology is you don't know what's there until you start digging. And as you start digging, it can become very complex, like this site did.
That's Justin Maxwell, the archaeologist tasked with this once-in-a-lifetime dig. We'll hear more from him later, as well as a representative of Ngāti Mutunga, the island's iwi. But first, Maui Solomon is the chair of the Moriori Imi Settlement Trust. Maui found out about the discovery of this waka while speaking at a conference called Te Aki Taonga, looking after one's treasures.
I got a text message from my wife Susan, who's an archaeologist, and Susan had been called in to do an initial appraisal of it. And so I was just absolutely gobsmacked, to be honest. But nor was I surprised that a waka had been found in that area, or the remains of one, because according to our oral traditions, the Rangi Haua, one of our voyaging waka, was wrecked there in a big storm about 700 or 800 years ago, and all of its crew, only a handful survived, and the waka was never seen or heard of again. So, it's possible that this waka is the remains or the wreckage of the Rangi Haua, but even if it isn't, it's probably, one of the most important archaeological finds in New Zealand's history, and perhaps even throughout the Pacific. What it will tell us is a great deal about our migration traditions, where the waka came from. And according to Moriori tradition, we have two streams of migration to these islands, one directly from Polynesia and one likely from Aotearoa, although that's not 100% certain. It will tell us about the type of, what the waka actually looked like, because there's so much material coming out of this archaeological site.
Those materials aren't just pieces of timber. Remains of sail, rope, twine and caulking have been dug up as well. Analysing these pieces could pinpoint who the waka belongs to and also retrace the journey of where it's travelled.
These waka back in those days, we're talking 800 to 1,000 years ago, Polynesians had settled, the vast Pacific Ocean. That's like 30 million square kilometres of ocean. And they were at the apex of their navigational abilities. And so sailing down here and sailing back was no real big deal. I've sailed from Napier to Rēkohu on a waka haurua with Jack Thatcher in 2017. And on the last 24 hours, we had 4 or 5 metre swell, 25 to 35 southwest winds, and just handled it easily. So what's exciting about this, not only for Moriori, but it's going to tell us so much more about ocean navigation, the early abilities of Polynesian navigators.
Glenys Philip Barbara, the Deputy Secretary of Māori Crown Partnerships at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, says it's still too early to even speculate the waka's origins. But some locals disagree. Maui's view is clear.
This is a Moriori ancestral waka because Pākehā arrived on English sailing ships, and in fact Ngāti Tama and Ngāti Mutunga arrived on an English sailing ship in 1835. The only ones to arrive here on the island in traditional voyaging waka were the ancestors of Moriori. So in my mind, there is no doubt that this is a Moriori ancestral voyaging waka. That area where the waka's been found is in fact, Moriori have what's called an exclusive statutory overlay classification because of its cultural and spiritual significance to Moriori, because our ancestors lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there are human remains regularly found in the sand dunes right up and down that coastline. I've seen them myself. And as part of our treaty settlement, we got that overlay classification, and we also got 2 hectares of land not far from where the waka has been found, because that was a kāinga, that was a traditional village where our people lived. So in some ways, it's not a surprise that something's been found there, because our people lived in that place for centuries.
But determining ownership of taonga found in New Zealand isn't as easy as choosing the most likely theory. There's an official process, guided by the Protected Objects Act. Initially, anything found belongs to the Crown, and groups who believe the object is theirs have to register their claim with the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. The Ministry will do an investigation and determine who the rightful owner is. And if they can't reach a verdict, the case gets passed on to the Māori Land Corp. In the case of this waka, both the Moriori Imi Settlement Trust and the Hokotehi Moriori Trust have filed ownership claims on behalf of Moriori. However, those claims are being challenged by one made by Ngāti Mutunga o Wharekauti Trust, a representative of the island's local iwi.
And this is nothing new, because we've had, over the last 15 or 20 years, a lot of our meheki Moriori ownership has been challenged by the various Ngāti Mutunga trusts down here. And the chair of Ngāti Mutunga, Monique Kroon, who's also the mayor, has indicated they'll also be challenging ownership of this waka. But, at the end of the day, you've got to produce the evidence, and we're happy to do that.
So is that tension between Ngāti Mutunga or Wharekauti and Moriori, is that an ongoing tension on the island?
I think it's been around since 1835. Moriori have recently concluded a treaty settlement, and Ngāti Mutunga are going through a treaty settlement, and some of the things that the Crown gave to us are also given to Ngāti Mutunga, which we weren't happy about, and Ngāti Mutunga weren't happy about the Crown recognising and giving land to Moriori. So, yes, there are those issues to be worked through. But, I've often said that actually Moriori and Ngāti Mutunga have more that unites us looking forward than, divides us looking back. But there has to be a reciprocity, there has to be an honesty, and there has to be good faith for that to occur.
We have a fantastic working relationship. The irony is that most of us are of both whakapapa or hukapapa, so we share so much together.
According to most historical accounts, there were 2 offsets of Māori tribes that came to Rēkohu from Aotearoa in the 1830s, Ngāti Mutunga and Ngāti Tama. But Monique Kroon, who is the chair of Ngāti Mutunga o Wharekauti Trust, says some iwi members believe Māori came earlier.
So Ngāti Mutunga came in 1835, having travelled down from Taranaki via Port Nicholson to Wharekauti. And so that started our relationship or our significance to Wharekauti. Previously, when you talk to our tipuna and some of our people today, they say that there were Māori here on the island pre-1835. And you've got to remember, Māori were travelling all around the world. So, it wouldn't be of any surprise that people had travelled here previously. And hence the kōrero around that there seems to be some knowledge that there was a waka there of some significance, and that there were people here in that area.
In a survey map from 1868, the area where the waka was discovered is labelled as Rangihaua, a Māori name, which Monique says could indicate the waka is of Māori origin.
So we've been involved right at the start, working with the Ministry of Cultural Heritage as we go through the process and to the first excavation. And so it is, of real significance to us. What we have discovered, though, is 2 things that it's not. It's not a Viking waka, and it's also not the Rodney. And many of our people talk about pre-1835 is that Māori were here on the island, and they have talk of this waka in that area. They've held the tradition that it is a tapu site. So there is some relevance to Ngāti Mutunga around this waka and the discovery.
While Ngāti Mutunga or Wharekoti Trust has registered a claim of ownership with the ministry, Monique says that doesn't mean the iwi think it's theirs.
Our position is let the waka tell the story and let it reveal its story. And again, it's of cultural and historical significance to Ngāti Mutunga, but it's also for the community. So yes, we have already registered our interest in the recently unearthed waka. And so we have formally completed that. And we also have been committed to, again, working strongly and collaboratively with the Moriori and the wider Chatham Islands community, and to ensure that this taonga remains in community ownership. And we also recognise the importance of a shared approach to decision-making regarding its care, conservation and eventual placement, and ensuring that its legacy is honoured in a way that respects all those with deep connections to this whenua.
In registering that claim of ownership, you must have some sort of idea of why you think the waka is of Ngāti Mutunga ownership. Can you explain that a little bit to me?
I think in terms of ownership, it is uncertain where it may have come from or who it belongs to. But given the stories of our people, our tipuna, there is knowledge of the waka that was there in that area. And there is also some written records around the waka, which was known as the Rangahoa, which was in that area.
Can you tell me a bit about that story of that waka?
Well, they believe it came there, and no one really knows when it came there. It was obviously believed to be pre-1835. They believed that there were people on it or travelled with it. And this is why we registered an interest, because we believe that it could be part of something that Māori had travelled on to the island.
I want to talk a little bit now about the relationship between Ngāti Mutunga and Moriori on the island. I understand there's always been a little bit of tension between iwi and imi, and I just want to hear your take on that.
Look, we have been working alongside Hokatihi Moriori Trust. Currently, we are going through a treaty settlement process, so we're both recognised as treaty partners, and so Moriori have received their settlement. We're in the process of initialing our deed of settlement, and the other mahi that we need to work alongside with Moriori is the shared redress, which is something that we're currently working with. We both have our views and our stories, and well, my view is that both stories are respected and neither story is wrong.
When it comes to this waka, what do you make of Moriori's claim of ownership?
My view, it is too early to establish any provenance of the waka. Again, we're still waiting for the initial report from the recent dig, which they've got 450 pieces to work with. They have taken some sampling for analysis, so I think it's really important that we allow the science and the data and the experts and our people's voices to really tell that story. And I think it's too soon for anyone to lay any claim of that waka until there's more evidence.
For you, what's most important in this process?
That we continue working alongside each other, Ngāti Mutunga, Moriori, and our community. That is most important, that we continue working together.
Justin Maxwell is an archaeologist.
So part of our job is science, but the real job, particularly when you're excavating, it's a real community process.
He actually completed his graduate research on the islands, looking at how Moriori hunted and gathered food and resources to survive. He says excavating taonga isn't simply a science job that should be left to the experts.
You can't do it by yourself. You can't do it without your community. You certainly can't do it without iwi and imi. So having spent years there working put me in very good stead for this job.
Justin, what was your initial reaction when you were called onto this job of excavating this waka?
Fear. So when we saw the first images, it was very clear that this was probably very important and potentially in an area that could be very easily destroyed with not much of a storm. So it made it clear that we really needed to get on with it. So when we first were on site, a few parts of the waka were sticking out of the bank of a creek. And that creek mouth at high tide particularly with a little bit of swell running, was just above the high tide mark. We did a very small excavation to see what was going on while we were there, and quickly discovered that there was a lot there, and that it was not a intact waka in one piece, but potentially a waka in many, many pieces and in a very chaotic fashion. So the waka itself sits on probably what was a thin beach dune over boulders, so the original beach surface. And in amongst the cultural layer in which the waka sits is also what appears to be the original forest, some of which has clearly been burnt. And along with the waka, there's a great deal of other wood material that probably relates to the forest, along with charcoal and so on and so forth. And all of this will be tested through time. And from that analysis, we'll start to understand the deposition process of both the waka and the cultural layer that it's sitting in.
Interesting. So there's not just wood from pieces from the waka, there's wood pieces from the original forest of the island.
Yes.
That makes it probably even more complicated, doesn't it?
A little bit.
So explain the excavation process to me, because I know nothing about it, and I imagine it's not just a matter of going down to the beach with a shovel and digging everything up, right?
No. So over the top of the area, there'd been many centuries of dune build-up, and we had to get rid of as much of that as we could first. And we didn't do that the hard way. We did that the easy way with a small digger. But from that point on, it's all digging by hand. And at first you can be reasonably robust in that you can use spades until you get down to the layer of the waka itself. But then the waka itself was literally dug with a few sticks, not much bigger than an ice cream stick, because that was the only thing that wouldn't damage the waka itself. So we excavated quite a big area, given the tools, and got everything out in one piece as best as possible, given the condition, and recovered over 400 components of a voyaging waka.
The waka is extremely well preserved because it's been lying in a sand dune, partially submerged in damp sand in an anaerobic environment. In other words, with no exposure to oxygen. In September last year, Justin and a team of professionals and keen locals started a month of excavation. After extending work for a week, it became clear this job was nowhere near being finished.
The problem with archaeology is you don't know what's there until you start digging. And as you start digging, it can become very complex, like this site did. We have suspicions of how big the site is, and it could potentially very large. And with very large comes very large costs. So the next stage really is to start looking at funding the future excavation and working with iwi and iwi to make that happen.
Is there a danger, because you did say earlier on in our discussion that the waka was buried in quite a precarious position where there was quite an urgency to dig it up.
Yeah.
Is there a danger that leaving it too long could risk losing it?
So the main purpose of this excavation was to recover the material that was at most risk from immediate destruction from a storm or weather event, and to leave the site in a better place. And we achieved that. We excavated a large enough area that the most fragile and most at-risk components of the waka are now removed. And then we've reburied the site in a way that will, in the short term, work well. It is, though, on the north coast of a place that when there are big seas, they really are big. And one way or another, this waka will come out. My preference is that we do it my way rather than the ocean's way.
Do you think you'll be able to find the whole waka?
We don't know. So you just don't know.
Yeah.
When we started this trip, the neighbouring landowner, Vince, him and his son found the waka, he was very worried that I brought this big team, and he said, what's going to happen if there's nothing else there? And I said, well, you plan for the worst. And we found far more than we could possibly have imagined. In the process of doing that, though, we now know that, yes, the waka definitely continues to the west and to the south, and potentially for up to 50 metres or more. So the entire waka is potentially there. And from that, we'll learn an enormous amount.
What everyone is arguably most eager to learn is who the waka belongs to. Locals have been quick to share their thoughts, but if Justin has any inkling of the answer, he's not giving it away.
To be frank, no one's really dealt with a waka of this type or scale before because nobody's had the opportunity to do so. We know some of the timbers came from mainland New Zealand, so that suggests that at least some of the waka came from here. I suspect it has significant age, but we need to test that and demonstrate that clearly. So rather than jumping in blindly, over the next few months, we will identify the timbers of the waka to species, as in what trees they are. We will date it well using appropriate material. We'll use various methods to potentially understand where it came from, things like isotope analysis and looking at the obsidian. Obsidian's wonderful in that we can literally know to the volcano where it came from. So when we have all that information together, that's when I'll answer that question.
So how do you test that? Because those sound like complex terms. Can you dumb them down a little bit to me?
So there's different specialists who are going to work with us.
Yeah.
One of them will take some of the fragments of wood and will be able to tell us what trees they are. Another will be able to take the fibres from the rope and twine and so forth. And once again, we'll be able to tell us what plants they are. Obsidian is a volcanic glass, and archaeologists really love it because we can identify it to where it came from. And there were small obsidian discs set into the carved parts of the waka. So all of these things together will give us a really wonderful picture of where it came from, when it came from, and potentially that's being a waka, it may have survived for many centuries as a working waka. So it isn't necessarily just from a short period of time. And these are the things we'll discover. It's the same with the timbers. Like some of the timbers may be from one place and some of the timbers may be from somewhere else.
And so what you're saying is that you could discover not just who the waka belongs to, but also where it travelled to?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, as a waka travels, you have to repair it.
Yeah. You said it would take probably about 6 months to excavate everything. How long then after that would it take to get a definite answer where the waka comes from? Will you ever get a definite answer?
I think we'll get a very clear idea of at least where the main parts of the waka came from. And that could happen as early as in the next 3 months. And that analysis is all starting to kick off now. And I suspect many people will be waiting with bated breath for us to start answering questions instead of putting them off.
Do you feel a certain kind of pressure on your shoulders with this job?
There is a certain responsibility, which is good. That's why we do this. To have this opportunity to work with the community and to help answer these questions it's brilliant.
And despite both iwi and imi claiming ownership of the waka, Justin says tension hasn't impacted the excavation. Everyone is super excited about the discovery and keen to chip in and help out.
Like we needed 20-foot containers for the conservators, and both Ngāti Mutanga and Moriori both supplied containers. And when I've needed permission to undertake various components of the work, I've had great support. Archaeology very much is a team sport, and it's a mix of professionals and volunteers and interested locals, many of whom have wonderful skills. And it's as a group that we pull off jobs like this. And without all those people involved, we wouldn't have achieved anything.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Thank you to Maui Solomon, Monique Kroon and Justin Maxwell. This episode was engineered by Alex Harmer, produced by Gwen McClure, and I'm Davina Zimmer. Me rongo ka kite anō.